All right, we are live. Welcome to Social Business Hour on this April 27th, 2015, the last show of April, which is our 1 year anniversary month of this show, Social Business Hour, SBiz Hour, hashtag
Woo!
on the Twitters. As always, joined by my co-host and the brains and beauty behind Social Business Hour, Rachel Miller. How are you today, Rachel?
I am okay. I wish. I truly hope everybody's having a better Monday than me. Today is kind of kicking my ass. So it's the first Monday I've had in a while. But I'm super excited about this topic, and I can tell our fans on Twitter are also very excited to have Eric. So welcome. Let's get going.
Awesome. Yeah. So we have, we have someone that has been one of, I don't know if we can put the exact terms of we have to go back, Eric, I think, to look the exact dates when we first started following her on Twitter. But I like to say Eric is actually probably one of the first people I ever followed on Twitter from a standpoint of the technology space and someone that was working for a tech company in the enterprise area and doing social media. So this is a guest I'm excited to have on. Been a longtime friend. Eric has because he is the man that's managing an enterprise social media, has a little bit of time constraints. So we're going to throw a little curveballs here halfway through the show or so. But before we get there, Eric, welcome to Social Business Hour. Introduce yourself, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you and I, Brian, were probably the OGs of like B2B IT social. So it's great to be here. I am one of the 3 social media managers at BMC Software. We do everything from mainframe to help desk to mobile to cloud computing, performance and availability. Basically, 82% of the Fortune 500 uses BMC software in one way or another. So all hardcore, back-end, very B2B type.
Yeah, it's funny. I always like to introduce BMC and a lot of the software is like a lot of the companies that you never realize that you've been using forever, and they're one of those companies that the tools and software that probably are your favorite only exist because of companies and tools that like BMC. There's even the idea of like I had someone that commented to me the other day and they're like, yeah, I've never owned a Dell computer and never used them, and neither has my company. And I was like, oh, it's funny. I was like, but I can promise you that you have Dell servers probably running a majority of your company things sitting in a data center.
Oh yeah, exactly. Something like 90% of mobile transactions still run over a mainframe. So there's lots of backend systems that lots of people don't know about for sure.
Awesome. So I'm curious, give us a little background about, I know you were doing something in Houston about trying to draw attention to social media people in Houston, and you are in Houston, Texas. And I love that you're a social media leader that lives and breathes this. This is your full-time job. This is what you're doing every day. I'd like to say that you're one of my favorite speakers, and you kind of inspired me to write that the speaking needs a wake-up call post, because I want to hear from people like you on stage more often, because you're the one doing it, living it, going to the CEO, going to your boss to get social buy-in. But you're also doing kind of initiatives offline. And I think it's too often we talk about social media and people only expect the conversation to be about what happens offline. So give us a little background about that before we get into our first question.
Yeah, I mean, here in the Houston social media scene, for the last 2 years, I've been putting together kind of a list of social media influencers in the space, just really kind of stoke up networking. If there's any kind of just trying to share knowledge, right? I mean, I noticed that in a lot of the social lists, Houston gets skipped a lot, right? So Houston's the 4th largest metro, but there was an infographic that said we're like the 20th largest market for social media marketers. So I was just trying to highlight that a little bit and say, hey, people in Houston are social. Here's some of the best people you need to talk to.
I love it. All right, hold on one second. I tell you what, my computers. Rachel, you said you're having one of those Mondays. I think my computers are having Mondays. I got web cameras jumping in and out. I got all kinds of fun trouble in the. So Rachel, can you go ahead and ask the first question? I'm gonna throw out my other computer monitor real quick.
Help if I unmuted. Man, it's a Monday. So we are here to talk about social media for the enterprise. So it's not always easy to kickstart a social campaign for large companies. So Eric, in your experience, what are some common pain points for some big brands trying to start social media?
I think a lot of people have trouble conceptualizing what the outcome is that they want, right? Because a lot of brands get caught up in the, hey, let's get a bunch of buzz and a lot of virality and all that kind of stuff. How do you really get into produce results? And that's really the first thing you need to do is come up with the goals that you want. Is it, people signing up for your newsletter? Is it people trialing something? You really need to figure out what those results are that you want to strive towards to really have a successful social campaign. You can't have one without that.
I agree, yeah. Setting goals is key, but I also think even before you set goals, you need to know who you're talking to. I think a lot of brands, and even big brands you think have their shit together, often miss that fundamental step of building out customer personas and making sure they're on the right network, talking at the right time. And that's a stumbling block for, I think, anybody starting a social media campaign.
And take a look and see who's out there. I mean, I was at a CI 100 event last year where there were like a dozen CIOs using Instagram to take pictures of sunsets at this resort we were at in LA. So who would have thought that the senior level CIO, the senior level tech person at a company would be all over Instagram filtering and all that. So, go out and see, where people are and how they're using the technology for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic example. You might actually be surprised at where your customer is. Don't assume that they're on Facebook and throw a bunch of money at it when in fact they're on Instagram or Snapchat or perhaps another platform that you hadn't, considered to be your top 3.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm curious, Eric, I'm curious, a majority of the conversation out there, I worked in the enterprise, I'm a big enterprise guy, but a majority of the conversation, it seems always to be about, B2C companies or companies when it comes to, hey, this is what you can do if, to create brand loyalty, and it's something like Dunkin' Donuts, where they have a cult following to begin with. And someone like you not only is focusing more on a B2B environment, but also there's an element there of, are people providing me the content, insights, and tricks that are relevant, that actually work in your environment. So, to kind of expand on that pain point question, I'm curious for you, when you're listening to people, when you're engaging with people, where do you see kind of the differences when you're talking kind of the space that you live, breathe in, and are managing a social media company for an enterprise versus someone that is kind of working in a company or a brand that has that B2C more easily loyal to, and defining the customer is definitely easier.
Yeah, I think it's who was it? There was a chemical company that just ran a campaign a couple years ago that said, we don't make the stuff that you use, we make the stuff that companies use to make the stuff that you use, right? So that's a lot of where BMC comes from. A lot of times you hear of B2B companies in best practices, and they're all stuff like John Deere or Intel, and if you have a $10+ million marketing budget, I still think it's, you can still put a picture of a John Deere tractor up on your Facebook page and get 10,000 likes. So I think there's almost a different level of B2B marketing when you're talking about a lot of those core but kind of invisible things, right? Software, HR services, energy, all those types of areas where you can't just put a picture up, right? You can't take a picture of software, really. You can't take a picture of electricity. You don't want to, right? Something's going on if you do.
You're telling me taking pictures of you holding a key attached to a kite for electricity, that's just not going to work?
That will not work. You might get some likes though, depending on how fried your hair gets. But seriously, you need to really kind of step into it where you need to provide more value. You need to really super engage people. You need to get in and kind of tell the stories of the users of your software and how they're using it to really kind of add to kind of make up for that, right? I mean, B2C companies, Ford puts a picture of a Mustang on their Facebook page, and they get 50,000 likes, literally 50,000 likes, and it's hard to compete with that on a side by side level for sure.
Oh, so I think we have a question from the community, and so Crowdhead. So remember, everybody that's watching this, hashtag SBizHour on the Twitters to go ahead and throw a question in. So Crowdhead, said, how do you push content out to enterprise employees? So I'm guessing this is a employee advocacy type conversation. I know Eric, you and I have had that conversation for a while. So yeah, can you take that question? How do you push content to out to enterprise employees?
Well, I think there's a good way to do it and a bad way, right? So the good the good way is always going to be the more natural, the more organic that you can do it, the better, right? So the old school way is write up some proposed tweets, email them out to people, and have them schedule them in or whatever, right? So there's kind of a non-software way to do it. One of our competitors in the space actually will use one of the platforms, but they'll just they'll attend a conference, tweet something, and then within like 5 hours, it'll be retweeted like 500 times. And it totally takes over the feed, and it's obvious they don't have 500 people there at the conference. And so it just kind of comes off as like, hey, we just want to steal the share of voice for the conference. So there's a lot of different tools out there now where you can go in and kind of propose different kinds of tweets depending on what department you're in, what business lines you work with, and it's a lot more sophisticated than it was even just a couple years ago that you just push out one message and have everyone retweet it automatically.
Yeah, there have been huge strides made in that, but I think for enterprise there's still a long way to go because it's just so incredibly easy for them to dominate a feed. I mean, even the brands that we love and admire, and because we do work with a lot of them, they flood my feed if they're promoting an event or someone happens to be at an event. And I don't think it's necessarily very effective. I think if you encourage your employees who are naturally social just to do what they would do anyways, I think that's way more effective. They're going to engage with their audience better than pushing out, whether it's on their behalf or pasting in verbatim a tweet. I think that's it doesn't seem human.
Yeah, well, and I've heard somewhere like 80% of your employees are willing to share company info. They just are scared of sharing something and like getting fired, right? So you need to kind of have that meeting where you sit down and tell people, hey, this is what's good, this is what's bad. Just tell them, hey, we actually have the opposite problem a lot of times is we don't have enough people sharing, right? So we're not out there like scrubbing people's Twitter feeds, making sure that they haven't said anything that could be slightly construed as confidential or something. The only time I've directly heard of someone getting fired for being on social is like 2 companies ago. Someone posted a picture on Facebook where they were drinking beer in their cubicle. As long as you're not doing that, like I think you're fine, right? So.
Yeah, I think people know when they're saying something that's probably not going to go over well with management, and they just make that choice. Or they're tweeting from the wrong account by mistake, which we've all seen those, incidences go viral. But I think if you just trust people and then just ultimately don't force the people that aren't going to be social, you don't run into those kinds of problems.
You got it?
Yeah, no, I agree. So I'm curious now. So, Eric, I like your presentation. I've seen you present. I know we both kind of talk about engaging influencers, both as social media people, but also as influencers ourselves. You've actually got me connected with Ford to do some influencer work with Ford. I know you're big in working with Ford. So I'm curious here on question 2. What are some best practices for not only engaging influencers, but connecting influencers with the actual brand? Because I know this is something you do really well, and you also do it yourself well when you're working with brands. How do you see this? What are some best practices you've seen?
Well, again, you need to figure out, what are you trying to do with the influencers, right? So I actually wrote a blog post for one of my old friends. I need to go look it up. I'll send it out in a tweet or something. Basically, like 5 or 6 different ways to actually use influencer marketing, right? So are you trying to get them to trial something and review it? Or are you trying to get them to attend something, right? So you get that all the time, Brian, is, hey, come out to our cool event. We'll pay your way. We want a blog post or a podcast or something. What's the goal, the end goal of your influencer relationship? Right now, we're working with some influencers on the BMC blog that they're influencers in their own space. They're writing guest post for BMC, and it's working out really well. So, you know, the first step is obviously trying to figure out who they are, right? So find some kind of metric that you want to use that says, okay, if you know clout's the most sophisticated you can get, then use clout. But you know, you can also use a couple different you know, different groups out there. You can come up with your own like kind of matrix of stats and figure out who, you know, has a bunch of followers or talks about your products or talks about your industry a lot, and figure out, you know, who you want to have come in and work with you. So like you mentioned Ford, Ford brought something like 200 different bloggers and influencers from across the nation to the Detroit Auto Show. They actually came up with their own hashtag that trended higher than it's the North American International Auto Show, NIAS. The Ford NIAS hashtag trended higher than the NIAS hashtag. So, you know, they were trying to bring people in to take over that conversation for sure.
So I know you mentioned clout, and I know you know, beyond, you know, and let's kind of go, I guess, beyond vanity metrics and even beyond clout and some of those influencer tools, because we're actually big fans of lots of different tools like Tracker and Twitterland and you know, all the tools from that side. But when you're identifying, you know, influencers, and I talk about a lot about, you know, understanding the community. You know, you yourself is, you know, kind of not only embedded with the community, but you know, technology. I worked in tech enterprise as well, and one of the things I always thought was really funny is, if you just listen to what the tech enterprise community is sharing, half the time you'll be able to identify influencers, or probably more than half the time, because really the influencers are the ones that the people are already vouching, already engaging with, they're already trusted. But you know, what are some other things that, you know, let's talk about brands as a whole. How are some good ways brands can really truly identify influencers moving forward, like as we're kind of building, because I really think the employee advocacy, influencer marketing, and social media marketing now have finally come together as one giant, you know, element within social business.
Yeah. I mean, in the past, we've actually used a couple agencies that put together a bunch of cool lists for us. If you have access to a larger social media management software platform, a lot of those come with influencer modules that you can use. Salesforce Marketing Cloud, Sprinkler I know does, I think Spreadfast does. So take a look at those, and that's kind of a really quick way of putting together a list of influencers that you might want to reach out to. You can all, you know, like you're saying, just see who kind of bubbles up in the feed. You know, you talk about like podcasting for social. There's like 3 or 4 guys that do like all the podcasts, and you're one of them. So you know, a lot of times it's not hard to go out there and just kind of look around and see, you know, who's out there doing the work and, you know, putting some feet on the pavement and getting out there.
So you know, on that same note, I guess, you know, one of the things I think of, you know, that you brought up that I thought was rather important there is, you know, first of all, it's listening and understanding your market. It's also caring about your market. But I also think, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts, you know, like I always felt like enterprises, if you had an enterprise that understood social, they invested in the enterprise tools like Spreadfasts, like Sprinkler, like Hootsuite Enterprise. And I mean, I think these tools are crazy powerful, and I believe most of the time agencies and small businesses don't have the luxury of those wonderful tools. And so that's kind of why at times it's influencer metrics, or sometimes you go to clout more often. But I also think it's important that you kind of talked about, even though you have access to those tools and you have that enterprise size like social media management, you still have to use some of these grassroots community social listening, because the tool isn't going to give you everything. And I think still dissecting what the tool is actually measuring it on is important. What are your thoughts there on kind of that enterprise social media tools? Like, do you feel like you have an advantage over a lot of the startups that are using more of the free versions of Buffer or Sprout Social, those ones?
Yeah, I mean, if you take a look at how some of the different tools measure, a lot of them will take basically like an impression standpoint, or like some kind of fancy derivative of that, right? So it might be the Wall Street Journal mentioned cloud computing one time in the last 3 months, but because they have like 4 million followers, they're the #1 influencer in the space. So, you know, does that really make sense? Probably not, right? There's obviously people, I mean, there are lots of people within the like 2 to 8,000 followers range that are huge in cloud computing and service desk and help desk and all the different places that BMC is, that really you wouldn't notice a lot of times if you pulled one of these reports. So really, it's a combination of using what kinds of all these reports that you have out there, plus just sticking your head out there and seeing who's talking about it. And that, like Ted Rubin, great example. The way that I got in touch with him was he made it onto a list of like the most social CMOs, something like 2010 or 2011 or something. And I went out and just kind of followed a bunch of them and tried to engage with people. And he, responded. And I met up with him for the first time at Social Media Marketing World last year. So in the same way, go out there, see if there's a list that exists. If there's not, see who's out there, search for different hashtags. You've got industry events, I'm sure, that almost everyone probably tweets about, especially if they're social. Go out there and see who you can kind of add to your own Twitter list that might be influential, and then you can kind of pair it out from there.
Well, especially, like, how many followers do you have, Eric?
140,000 something.
146,000. So, like, if Rachel and I combined our twos and multiplied by some high number, we would be in that ballpark. And I thought it was funny. Mark Babbitt actually said, he had a quote that I thought we would kind of love here. He said, "Beware of Twitter celebrities versus influencers. Whose mind or life have they changed lately?" And I think that's actually a pretty good, note to remember, because I think, there's lots of people that have lots of followers, and there's lots of people that don't have very many followers, and I think they are all influential, just connection to community. Eric, you were someone that influenced me to really embrace social media, and it had nothing to do with your number of followers. It had 100% to do with your engagement. So, Rachel, sorry I cut you off there.
Oh, no, I was just trying to slip in a question from Twitter. I know we only have a couple more minutes with Eric. So you have a question from Jack. He's asking, do you see the adoption of Twitter growing in B2B since you first started? And it's a two-part question. And what is your favorite social channel?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more people on Twitter from B2B. At BMC, within the last 6 or 8 months, we've gotten almost all the different executive leadership on board on Twitter. We're helping provide them some content because they don't quite know what to talk about all the time. But a lot of them are starting to really get engaged and learning their own things and following people and making lists and all that kind of stuff. So I think from the B2B space, you're going to see a lot more people on Twitter. And IBM did a study back in 2012 that said 33% of B2B buyers were already using social, and 75% were planning to in the future. Another stat I saw somewhere was around 55% today of B2B buyers are using social in one degree or another. So I think that only just speaks out to the fact that you're going to see more people using social and using Twitter for that purpose. And I do like Twitter. I think it's really interesting, just the kinds of engagement you get, and it's kind of cool just the fact that really anyone can engage with you about anything. You could be watching. I used to watch, don't judge me, Switched at Birth on ABC Family, and they would have live tweet chats with some of the stars and all this kind of stuff, and people would be talking about it, and even like some off the wall, like random, like small time almost like ABC Family show. People have they have a pretty decent following on Twitter, so I think that's kind of cool. Obviously, we've got the new stuff. We've got Brian here in his Meerkat shirt. I think that's huge. We've got different we've got plenty of different chats that have been talking about Meerkat and Periscope. So, and there's always more and interesting stuff coming out there. So,
in the art of what our goal was when we built this chat a year ago, we designed it because we wanted to talk to real people who could actually provide real insights and provide real actions to our community, because honestly there was too much fluff going on. So in that sense, Mr. Eric T. Tung has to go do what his real job is now. So he will be bouncing out halfway through our Twitter chat right now. But Eric, thanks again for jumping in. I'm going to step in and do my best to answer some of the questions we have ready and share some of the social business activation, but you'll get lots of tweets coming back at you. Thanks again, Eric. We appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right, Rachel, you're stuck with just me now, so I apologize for that being the case right now. But so yeah, so I really appreciate Eric's insights when it comes to kind of he's talking when he gives examples, it's really what he's doing day to day. I mean, I've worked with him on influencer campaigns in like very hard spaces. Like let's talk about things like mainframes. I mean, mainframes are so stuck in the past. Like social media is, I mean, if you were an influencer in mainframes, I'm sure social media wasn't something that has ever been thought about as your KPI and such. So I think it's an interesting discussion because I part of the reason I said I used to love working in the data center is the bar was so freaking low that all I had to do was like tweet at an event. I was the #1 tweeter. So I think this is an interesting discussion, and I love the dialogue going on Twitter right now too. It seems to be a very good debate going on kind of enterprise, startup, and some of that social business tricks.
Yeah, and I think back to your point that it's almost beneficial to be in a slightly weird space or in a more niche industry because it's really easy to identify who is an influencer versus more flooded spaces like footwear or just SaaS in general. It's incredibly hard to pinpoint who would be an ideal candidate to be an ambassador for you. So I'm all about the little mainframe. I would be kind of jealous.
Yeah, he does shrink his total database down. If someone's trying to do social selling or let's say digital marketing, the amount of social media, quote unquote, celebrities, rock stars, and is ginormous compared to. I mean, we have Cloud Talk on Thursdays, and it's hilarious. Identifying cloud computing influencers is a much easier game than social business influencers.
Completely agree. So, okay, so this next question is kind of a softball for you as, you're sporting your Meerkat shirt and you are Mr. FOMO. So question 4 is, what should brands consider when selecting new channels or technology to embrace for social media?
No, of course. I love the question, of course, because I helped create it. But part of that, part of what I think new channels, and actually this might surprise most of the audience, because I do suffer from fear of missing out or FOMO, and I am actually live streaming this on Meerkat and Periscope as we're talking. I actually believe that identifying a new channel is I think it's something that you have to really focus on the strategy first and understand why. I think oftentimes people want to jump on a network before even listening. If you can listen on things like Pinterest or Meerkat, jump on as a participant and first see if your community is even there or your community wants to be there. I can't tell you how many times I get frustrated when someone says, I need to be on Snapchat. And I'm like, your target demographic is 45 to 65. Who the hell in that demographic is on Snapchat? And if you can prove me wrong, yes. But don't start the conversation like I need to be on Snapchat. The conversation should be for every new channel. I've listened, I've learned, my community is gauging there, I need to be there. And sometimes I'm okay with being the front runner. Gary Vaynerchuk talked about that a little bit on sometimes if your community is not there and you think they should, you as a brand should get there and own the space first. But I think it's kind of it's a fair balance, don't you think?
It is. The philosophy of build it and they will come is not always applicable. And while I am a huge advocate for just, straight up asking your existing customers where they are in social, definitely verify, because where people think they're most active is often not. You might find out everyone's like, oh, I'm super active on LinkedIn. So then you start this huge LinkedIn campaign and it turns out, no, they're not really. It's actually Twitter. So definitely take those insights from your database, but verify them before rolling out a campaign.
Well, and even looking at the platform correctly, I mean, I think, unfortunately, let's talk about Meerkat and Periscope. You don't need to build out a Meerkat policy and a Meerkat strategy and a Periscope strategy. You need to focus on video and live streaming as a whole and create your strategy around that. And I think if you're going to create an individual strategy for every damn social network, every app, you're going to run yourself crazy. You have to kind of take a step back and say, what am I really enabling? And actually, I'd even talk about to embrace Meerkat and Periscope in your company, you actually have to have a policy and a philosophy that entrusts your employees to actually do what they should be doing, because that's the power of these tools going behind the scenes. But if you start with a Meerkat strategy, you're really going to screw yourself over because you don't even know what's happening tomorrow. It's not adaptable. I think looking at the type of strategy, I think that's where a lot of brands make, because I think everyone kind of says, well, of course I had a strategy first. And then I look at it and go, well, your strategy was for that individual app and that individual niche. but yet you don't even let Google Plus Hangouts run in your network. Why the hell would you go and create a Meerkat strategy if you haven't figured out how to get Google Hangouts approved in your company?
It's true, and I think a lot of people need to think of what they can repurpose. So I know you can record, your Mirrorcast, which is awesome, but I think a lot of people forget that. Like, why spend a lot of time on a venture that's fleeting? It's best, like, obviously the Hangouts are awesome because we can record them and then people can watch them over and over and over. But I think about that when you're on social, like, how many ways can I repurpose the time that I'm spending here? So it's not just a time suck for one person. It's something you do once, but then it's completely repeatable in a very duplicate, easy, retweetable way.
Couldn't agree more. And I like some of the people, on Twitter right now, kind of agreeing with the idea of finding the strategy and understanding, what you kind of want to do. And I also know, some of this conversation I see around, kind of influencer marketing as well as social strategy from an enterprise activation standpoint. If you're, I said this before, if you suck offline, you're going to suck online. But if your company culture sucks, no matter what social network you go to, no matter what tool you're using, it's not going to truly hit home. And I guess more of an actionable item of this is, like, if you are just being half good on Twitter, why don't you start being great on Twitter and stop focusing on LO and stop focusing on, because I do believe brands kind of sometimes skip a step on mastering a network or a solution or a tool before jumping into the next one. I think that's kind of some of the dialogue I see on Twitter as well.
Yeah, I think kind of to go back a couple of weeks ago when we're talking about like scaling and social being free, it's not, and it is easy to kind of get sucked into that trap. Well, Twitter is free, LinkedIn is free, but you're paying for employees' time to manage those accounts well. And you're right. If someone is trying to maintain, 6 or 7 different social networks, it's going to be super hard, especially when they start to grow. We have a pretty cool question from Twitter, actually, from Holly. Thoughts on paid influencer campaigns? I'm a social manager for retail, and we're launching our first influencer campaign for back to school.
Wow, so this is I think this is the gorilla question whenever it talks about influencer marketing and influencers in general. I think this is also part of my spiel on what really an analyst's role plays in today, especially if you focus at like kind of the millennial generation. What an analyst is and what a brand is, and then what an influencer is. And sometimes I hear this a lot is people will come to me and ask for me to be an influencer because they say my community no longer trusts us as a brand, and they believe that the analysts are all paid talking voice, whoever's kind of paying them the big dollars to write a white paper. And I kind of push back and say not all analysts are doing that, but this gets into the gray area of an influencer, because when an influencer is getting paid, does it skew their point of view? And I think here's the problem. If you have to value their time, you have to value the time of an influencer. I think that's extremely important. But at the same time, you want their voice and their conversation and the content they're creating to be unfiltered, non-polluted. And can you do that in both sense, where you're paying for someone's time and you're paying for the experience, but you're not paying or dictating what they're saying? I think you can, but I think identifying the right influencer and identifying and kind of publicizing that correctly. I know that's even something I've made a mistake on before is, if IBM is sending me to an event, IBM has paid me to go to multiple events, but they've never once paid me for a piece of content or told me what to tweet or told me what to create. And even to the point where I've created and talked about things good and bad on multiple different things. So I think part of this paid conversation has to be about understanding the content you're trying to get created and also valuing that influencer's time, because if you really believe they have value to your community, shouldn't you prove that by investing in them? I mean, what are your thoughts, Rachel?
Yes, I do feel in the realm you're speaking of more of a thought leadership influencer. Yes, I think if you're going to an event, there are a lot of reasons that are completely valid to be paid. In context of retail, I think you need to be aware, the person who asked the question, there are a lot of rules and regulations to be aware of. If you are launching an influencer campaign and you have paid this person, you do need to put that in your ads and let people know in disclaimers that, this person isn't doing it because they just love your brand, that you actually, solicited them to be a spokesperson. And I think that's different. I am a fan of finding people in the community that are already advocates and enlisting them, particularly in a retail or community environment. But yeah, peeing on in certain contexts is completely relevant. But when you're pushing a product, be careful. I think it's not always, it doesn't always work either. If it's like you just pulled in a big name to sell Pepsi, you know, so-and-so is going to drink Pepsi because there's a pop star promoting it. You know, a lot of people will, but it probably turns out they prefer Coke anyway. So just be careful what you wish for.
And I think part of that also is like, you know, have an idea what the influencer strategy is there, you know, in your retail space or back to school. Is it getting people to be aware of your brand, or is it getting people to buy individual products or maybe go to an individual store? Because I think all of those would have a different type of influencer and a different type of incentive or influence. I mean, there's plenty of affiliate type marketing things where you can have someone incentivized based on what they actually drive for results, which I think is a powerful way. I also think, like you said, Rachel, if you have a great community and great fans and great advocates, activating them and understanding what is important to them. I mean, I'm wearing a Meerkat shirt on Social Business Hour that is a show that we have sponsors and things. Meerkat has not paid me a penny. And what they have done is they've cared about the community and knew that I was an advocate. And they sent me this shirt and didn't say, Brian, please wear this on your show. Because you know what? If they would have, it would have never made it on one of my shows. But they sent this and said, here is our thanks for, you know, you being, you know, passionate and loving our platform. And what am I doing? I'm wearing it representing that shirt. You know, like, so I think it's kind of, when we talk about influence, sometimes we forget that, you know, I often like, you know, Converse is a great one. Converse shoes will actually allow their influencers to take pictures of the shoes, and they'll just retweet it or repost it on Instagram. And that is enough because they're like, I'm going to keep buying Converse and taking pictures of them because it just went out to 100,000 Instagram followers instead of my 50 followers on Instagram. So I think identifying what matters to your influencers is also key. But like you said, Rachel, there also is a difference in type of influencer when you're getting into thought leader and driving an entire philosophy change with these influencers as well.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, if you're, you know, driving change on a holistic business level versus pushing Converse, yeah, I think, and again, it needs to be reciprocal. And in any circumstance, the relationship between brand and influencer must be reciprocal.
Yep, I agree. I was actually just replying to a tweet as well. You know, multitasking in all facets.
Okay, so I'm gonna steer the ship here. So as our community knows, I'm a big startup junkie. I think I'm on my 4th consecutive one right now. And there are a lot of benefits to being in a startup environment versus enterprise when trying new tools and channels and a lot of the fun things that we've been talking about today. So Brian, in your experience, what lessons can be learned from small business startups when implementing social into an enterprise company?
So I was kind of the opposite of Rachel. So I was from enterprise world all of my life up until 2 years ago. I went to my first startup, and it was a crazy fast-paced startup. We went from 256 employees to 616 in the time that I was there in 2 years. And then, of course, I left there and started our own startup that Rachel and I are partners in with Daniel Newman called BroadSuite, which is definitely a grassroots startup. And I think part of what I love about a startup environment that enterprises could learn from is the support and ability to fail fast when you're deciding on strategies or tweets or blogs. You can almost adapt and kind of roll with the punches easier because if everybody's on board and everybody sees it, you don't have to worry about this board member. Or for me, I had a senior VP one day walk into me and say, "Why the hell are you doing Throwback Thursdays on Facebook?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? We've been doing that for a year and a half now." He's like, "Take down every single one immediately." And I was like, that's interesting because the CEO used it in his keynote 6 months ago as one of the coolest things he's seen is the amount of engagement we had on a Facebook Throwback Thursday for our cybersecurity thing. So I think the ability to kind of keep everybody in the loop, no, it is still even hard, even in our small business, to keep everybody in the same conversation. I think that's one of the things. I also think the distance between brand and community is shorter. The people that are actually living and breathing and working with the brand are usually in a startup, are usually the same people working on the strategy and sitting in the boardroom. Where in an enterprise company, oftentimes, I mean, I would hear many, many times that people would come into my office at my enterprise gig and say, "Brian, I need to know business intelligence, social intelligence, what our competition is going to do," because I'm presenting that at the board. And I'm like, Why am I not in that conversation? You need me to give you all the information. No, it's not your business to be in there. And for me, that's, you're playing telephone game. Not only that, but could that guy actually answer questions? So what about you, Rachel, when you're talking about your startups that you've kind of seen, what do you kind of, hey, startups, or hey, enterprise, this is what you could learn from us, the startup? I mean, how do you kind of see some of those questions?
I think in the context of this conversation, I would encourage large companies, and particularly enterprise, to kind of mimic mini startup environments within their company. I think it's perfectly reasonable for them to set up teams of people who can try new tools, experiment on new channels, because they're not lacking in people. And they have huge benefits that startups don't have. They have the resources to do things like that. So take that same philosophy of experimentation, and whether it's a fail fast scenario or it's a success, try it in a bubble. And if it works, then scale. So I think what scares enterprise leaders is they're like, oh man, I've got to get 20,000 people on board. But it's like, no, you really don't. You just need to sell 10. And if 10 people do it successfully, then you do it with 50, and you keep going until all of a sudden it is a company-wide endeavor. But create little startups within your enterprise in the departments where it's applicable. And I think that could be, in my mind, it seems like a smart move.
No, I agree. The employee advocacy strategy that I've built out and helped brands implement is actually going to each department and creating like a startup department inside of each one of those departments that's going to embrace employee advocacy. Because what the startups do with employee advocacy is everybody lives, eats, and breathes the company. And here's the thing to remember, and I know Eric did kind of touch on, but I know Eric believes in this, is you have to have employees that understand and have a passion for what you're doing and understand the overall purpose. And too often we look at trying to activate these kind of social philosophies and saying, this is how you tweet. And I will keep saying it over and over again. You focus on how with training, and why with giving them the idea of why social sharing is important, why you need to have a social media policy, why I want you to like our brand post on LinkedIn whenever we post it. If you don't tell them the why, not only is there not a reason for them to keep doing it, but there's also success doesn't look like anything for them. And I'm seeing some things on Twitter where it's like, not only can a large company afford to fail, but a large company sometimes needs to activate little startups so each one of those startups can fail along the way without the global policy or philosophies, failing as a whole.
Completely agree. And yeah, I'm as everybody should be, a big advocate for the why. I think when people understand the end goal, that they are contributing to the greater good, I think that's when they get it. And if they don't have that aha moment, then they're never going, whatever, it doesn't even have to be social, whatever the project happens to be, you really need to explain the why, I think, to empower people to act on it.
All right, we got a great question on the why. And this comes from Sabrina exactly 10 seconds ago. So that's what you call real time, bringing the questions in. What is your biggest why for getting employees involved in the brand's social media efforts? Curious to hear on your side, Rachel, from a why perspective.
For me, it's about generating revenue. So you can't be in business if you're not making money, with several exceptions for nonprofits or whatever. But I think in general, if you're not making money, you're not in business anymore. So the why comes down to the more people that talk about us on social, the more people will know about us, the more people will like us and refer us, and you build this happy little ecosystem of brand awareness. And it starts at home. So you need to get your employees, your executives, your entire team on social. And if they like the company, they'll do it. But ultimately, it's like, well, if you want to work for this company, we need to make money. We need to generate leads. And the easiest place to do that right now is on social.
I love it. I kind of take the approach usually with a why, is I will caveat this. Not every employee must be a social employee, but every employee has a role to play in the storytelling of the brand. If it's either part of the story, the reason the story is happening, they are the story creator, where they're going to turn it over to the content team and the content's going to create it, or they're the story sharer, where they're the social employee. So I think the why for each one of those people is unique. I worked with a developer community of 129 software developers. When I tell them why they need to be part of the storytelling, it's not because you need to have a personal brand and you want somebody to follow you on Twitter. They don't care about that whatsoever. But what they do care about is, hey, don't you want to help attract some of your fellow coworkers or some of the industry expert, best software developers in the industry? And none of them know what you do or why our company is so great. And they'll go, you're right. How can I help there? What? And you're like, okay, this is why you need to be involved in our storytelling social employee philosophy, because it's going to help make you look good. It's nobody. I mean, it comes down to it. I talked about it last week. Everyone loves to, if you could put former and the name of the company that you worked at last, that means you loved where you worked at. And nobody wants to put into LinkedIn a company that nobody knows what it is or what they do. And it's something that you kind of, every person has a reason. I don't care if it's not even for self-promotion. It's this idea that, if I love what I'm doing, and hopefully that you've hired and fired a culture that allows you to have people that are loving what they do, that why becomes, what can you do to show others and help us grow? And I agree, Rachel, because I had a CEO tell me this a long time ago, and it stuck with me. Everybody in the company sells, no matter what your job is. Every single person. It's the way you tell the story. It's the way you share with your parents what you did at your job. Your parents talk to somebody else that happens to be a VC investor, and now that VC investor knows about your company. That is an element of selling. And if you can activate all of them to understand the brand story, start with the how, give them training. Make sure that they understand the brand story. I told that story before. I talked to 14 different employees in one company. All 14 had a different answer on what their brand story was. It didn't matter what social employee or employee activation we did. That was going to be a crappy result. You have to start with, okay, let's get the story correctly to the people and then get that how with the training and kind of move forward.
Yeah, I think I was actually having a conversation with a friend over the weekend about that. And I think one realization that I think a lot of people are trying to come to is that we are always selling because we're always on. So whether you're at the coffee shop or you're at a parent-teacher meeting or wherever you happen to be, you're still employee of XYZ and a proud representative. And hopefully you're doing them proud by whatever you're saying and doing. And I don't think that was necessarily the case 20, 30 years ago. I think that's whether that's, because we're so transparent and people know that we are at Starbucks right now because we've checked in on Yelp and, Swarm and, but it's also incredible branding and awareness building that wasn't capable even just a few years ago.
No, I couldn't agree more. And even some of the conversation on Twitter being, I think part of this conversation with enterprise activation is, part of the reason enterprises have been so successful with employee advocacy and some of these bigger social business initiatives is they have went after the culture and the people that are already natively social. And let's think about that. I mean, you have the IBMs they are a country. They're the size of a country. They're going to have a big pool to deal with of people that are already social, but it's the same percentage. I think startups need to look at, hey, if 3 of your new hires are your best social employees, make it work for them. Don't just think because you don't have your senior managers or your leaders on social that it can't be successful. I think you also kind of have to look at who in your company is successful and kind of how you can, upcycle or roll with them as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment. And actually, there was a tweet that caught my attention. I forget who said it, but sometimes, the leaders and executives perhaps don't have the right tone to be the face of the company. So you do need to be respectful of that. And if you do have people in other departments who are great brand ambassadors, then definitely empower them to go forth and conquer.
Yeah, you know what? Every one of those leaders, every one of those CEOs, almost everyone, they might not have the right tone or the right content, but I guarantee they have the right passion and the right story. So it's conveying that passion and story and doing your damn job. If your job is to content and the branding, get it out of that guy that knows it or that woman that knows it and get it out of their mouth and then transcribe it so that it's consumable. And I think the excuse that my executives aren't into social, okay, why are they not? Have you presented the how and the why? Have you explained to them other companies in our industry that are actually doing it today? Have you made it easy for them? If they love to talk, give them a microphone. Record them on talking. If they don't love to talk, but they do a keynote speech twice a month, 1 half-hour keynote speech can be turned into 40 pieces of content for that month. So I think having the excuse or saying the excuse that my executives or my buy-in is no longer applicable. I think you need to readdress what that is, enable it, and you know what? I'm learning too because it's keep it simple, stupid. Figure out ways to keep it simple so you can amplify their stuff. All right.
Mic drop.
Twitter is blowing up. I just saw that post that we are trending on Twitter. I think this is a good spot to say that we love our community. I mean, it's been a year, Rachel, since you and I started this adventure on Social Selling Hour, which turned into Social Business Hour. And we love that the brands are paying for our sponsorships. We love the leaders that we have on there. But I truly believe it's the Twitter community. It's the community that gets in there and engages. I mean, our hashtag is being shared all day, every day, 7 days a week. Our community is 365. It just happens to be once a week we get on here as a megaphone and bring everybody to that universal mark. But I can tell you, I was laughing. I woke up this morning and there was like 13 comments on different YouTube videos from these chats of the past, and some of them were from old ones a couple years ago. And then people are like, "You have no idea how this helped me and my company." I think that's kind of the power of this chat. So I just want to give a shout out and a thank you to the community on Twitter today for being awesome like they are. Seems to be every day.
And you can't thank our community without giving a shout out to our queen of community, Kristen Cardos, out there manning the Twitters, the wind beneath my wings. Thank you, Tank.
Yes, you rock. You rock, Kristen Carr. And in my opinion, the best Meerkat community manager of all times as well, because she jumps in my Meerkats and drops in hashtags and links, things that not only is she doesn't have to do, but it's because she follows the show you care without question. So, all right, so this is a good one. I'm curious, question 6, enterprise companies that are doing great at becoming a social business. Rachel, I know you as a startup have a tool that not only can work with enterprises, but work with all kinds of different brands, but you also live in, California where enterprises are all over you. I think social business doesn't mean that they are great at social media. It means that they are a social business as a whole. Culture, people, they are all on social. They're naturally social when it comes to collaborating. But some brands are great social business for what they do offline, just as much, if not more, for what they do online. So what are some of the enterprise social businesses that you really kind of have respect for, that you kind of work with or seen or kind of live with there in California?
Well, I don't work with any. I'm definitely a big, I guess, being a startup fan, I'm definitely a fan of the underdog, so I could probably name drop 15 startups that I think are doing social business well. A big fan of IBM. I'm constantly amazed of just how they motivate and engage on a human level despite their size. It's easy to forget that, like you said, they are a country. I think if they do set the bar high, but they're definitely kind of a spark in a very dark room. The most enterprises are lacking in all the ways that IBM is great. So that would be my top mention for now.
I love it. No, and actually, I had this discussion over brunch with my brother. My brother actually asked me a question. He said, "What the hell is an enterprise, and how do you define an enterprise?" And
it's like a starship on
Because I think that's also kind of one of those things where we often think of an enterprise as a company that was born pre-cloud. But, I'll give some love to Netflix. You have the Netflixes of the world that were born on the cloud that are now ginormous entities. Facebook is an enterprise. But when we think of enterprises, we almost can sometimes think of these legacy old brands. So, like Salesforce has done an amazing job creating what I believe is like a cult following around Dreamforce. I mean, I remember seeing Dreamforce and being green with envy that I have never been there, and I have not been to Dreamforce yet. But it's one of those events where they've turned that entire concept into socializing concepts and solutions. And I mean, I think they've done an amazing job of kind of driving this cult feeling. And I think part of this enterprise conversation for me is you also have to play the global element. Who is really good at globally being social aware? And I will say with our thoughts and prayers go out to those in Nepal that were dealing with that earthquake. And I being the person that immediately goes to social, and I was up till about 5 a.m. that night when the Nepal earthquake happened, not only looking and listening to some of the tweets, but screenshotting some of the businesses that just don't get it, and and ones that were promoting an earthquake blizzard or an earthquake milkshake promoted in that region at the same time an earthquake went on. And, you should know that when you built the strategy around a word that has to do with a natural disaster, that you have to be well aware to have those tools in there. And I think the great social businesses, it's not that they don't fail. It's that they create that engagement and community involvement beforehand, so that if they do fail, if they do screw up, we almost kind of have that relationship with them that we will kind of work with them. We won't bury them. I mean, I'm not giving you a name with the 2 brands that I saw doing a really bad job in the Nepal space, because they have a relationship with me, and I DM'd them and I sent a message on Facebook to one of the people that I know works for them and said, hey, this does not look good in your region for what you're doing on social media. So I also think, there's other brands that are really great at this. I think, shout out to, Buffer. I think Buffer and Hootsuite are, although they play in our social media space, there's lots of social media tools and social media companies that suck at social. Go look at, I can give you about 30 different social media accounts for social media tools that have the worst social media management of all time. And I think there's a difference between being a social business and truly caring about the community and being engaged with the community. And you have the ones like Hootsuite who pass around Periscope to every one of their company cultures around the globe. And someone in each building, each office took the Periscope and showed everybody around the company culture. That to me is an awesome social business. I think we can learn from all of those companies. AWS was the one that just kind of got thrown up there. Amazon. I've been at AWS reInvent. That event, get this, their CEO and Werner Vogel is from AWS. He actually gets their advocates as well as their current users that come up there and tell people at an event offline what they don't like about AWS. I was sitting in the front row and I'm seeing slides of what we were not happy with. And I was like, holy crap. But AWS cares about that development community that much to where they're getting their fans, but they're also getting the ones that are like, hey, we're here, but we're not happy. And I think that's an element that plays in this as well.
Completely agree. Yeah, if you're an enterprise and you don't have alerts for natural disasters, that's the name of your product. That's a major fail. Hard to recover.
No, yeah, for sure. I think that's across the board. So, in this theme of, I think, community and being, trusting and engaging, we're excited because next month for May, we have lots of things that we're kind of launching at millennialceo.com, which is kind of the home for Social Business Hour and Broad Suite. So we'll actually, coming in May, we'll actually have chats 5 days a week. So we'll have 5 chats in our arsenal Monday through Friday. Couldn't be more excited about that. Stay tuned for more details on what those chats are, what their times are. We also have podcasts going off like crazy. We have different things happening. We also, the rumor is I will meet Rachel face-to-face in the month of May, but we're not inking that anywhere because that would be like the 5th month in a row that we're supposed to meet. But I love this conversation. I'm sad that Eric had to leave early, but I think we kept the conversation going. I think it's thankfully because our fans on the Twitters are doing an amazing job driving a lot of this social business conversation.
Can we just also say how much you suck at keeping secrets?
Yes. I'm not very good at keeping secrets or things for launch campaigns. Actually, it's funny because I'm usually really good at I have 8 beta tested apps on my phone that are all using test flight, and I'm not allowed to screenshot them, so I actually have to go use my wife's phone or my daughter's iPod Touch to take screenshots. I'm really good at embracing that. But knowing when Rachel is giving me that look through the bottom square when I start to say about our 5 shows, remembering at that moment that it was supposed to be a secret still, something that I still suck at. But there you go. You guys got it. If you were listening still at the 59th minute and the last couple of overtime here at Social Business Hour, then you got the insight. If not, you'll have to stay tuned for millennialceo.com/SBizHour. I know we have a friend of the show, a long distance person, I believe, is going to be on the show next week. Rachel, who do we have on the show next week?
We have a very rambunctious Australian joining us. It should be an epic show. So those who are down for some crazy insights on growth hacking from a man who's actually doing it and successfully, and it's just a bunch of fun, tune in. It should be a really great episode.
Growth hacking on Social Business Hour. That is why we partially changed the name from Social Selling Hour to Social Business Hour, because it's really about how do you fit all of these things together. Enterprise activation, inbound marketing last week with Socito folks that pretty much just rocked the house. And then we have Australian Wow, who will be wowing us long distance. So I'll be there with 2 people. I'll be out accented between Rachel and Australian Wow, talking about growth hacking. I'm excited. I promise I will have my notes and paper and watch the video again. So yeah, same time, same channel. Like to thank our sponsor, IBM Social Business, New Way to Work. IBM is reinventing what email looks like today. So make sure you guys go ahead and check out ibm.com/verse. And you can actually sign up for IBM Verse and see some of the latest, greatest tools and what they're doing with IBM Verse. So with that, we are out of here on the Meerkat, on the Periscope, on the Google Hangout, on the Twitter chat. We thank you all. You guys rock. Make it a wonderful Monday. See you next week.
Cheers, all.